Welcome to my channel. Please hit like, share, and subscribe. In this video, we'll be touching on the life and times of Mary Wells. Mary Esther Wells was born in Detroit, Michigan on May 13, 1943. Her birth certificate identified her mother as Geneva Campbell Wells, a housewife, although she worked cleaning houses. Arthur Wells was listed as Mary's father, and both parents were identified as black. Except for his name on Mary's birth and death certificates, and Mary's claims that he was brutal to her mother, little else is known about Arthur Wells. Even though her family was unscathed by the 1943 riots, Mary wasn't particularly lucky in her upbringing. The first area she lived in was an African American neighborhood in Detroit's east side called Black Bottom. Mary's family soon moved to an area in Detroit's west side, now called the Cass Corridor. The new neighborhood was a working-class residential area of brick and wood frame houses, many occupied by two families, with a number of small brick apartment buildings. It wasn't ritzy, but it wasn't as poor as Black Bottom. Although Arthur Wells was often absent from the family home, Mary said when he was present, he often verbally and physically abused his wife. Mary told Curtis Womack that she never knew, especially on weekends, when her stepfather would start abusing her mother. When she was a little girl, she would jump on Arthur's back in futile attempts to stop his aggression. Although Arthur was the sweetest guy when he wasn't drinking, she hated him. His alleged abuse of her mother made her particularly sensitive throughout her life to the threat of such treatment. Mary loved her mother dearly, and later in life expressed deep sympathy for Jenny's hard life as a cleaning woman. When Mary started making money from singing, she bought diamonds and minks for her mother before she even bought them for herself. Mary also battled two serious illnesses in her childhood. Beginning at age 3, she was bedridden for 2 years with spiral meningitis, a disease that left her temporarily paralyzed, partially deaf, and temporarily blind in one eye. According to one of her friends, it could have been worse. For a while, Mary was not expected to live, but the doctors gave her a new medication which saved her life. Her mother tried to cheer her up in the hospital by decorating her room with balloons, but when Mary recovered, she had to learn to walk all over again. For the rest of her life, she bore a tiny scar on her forehead from falling out of a hospital bed when the nurses weren't watching her, and her vision in one eye was permanently damaged. Then, at age 10, she almost died of tuberculosis. She had another bout with TB in 1965 when she was 22. She spent so much time in hospitals and with doctors that her early ambition was to become a nurse, a doctor, or a scientist. Mary enjoyed singing and remembered being enchanted by the movie musicals of the time she saw at local theaters, movies, such as Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, Funny Face, and Gigi. Wells had discovered her goal in life. I knew I could sing and I loved to perform, so I figured I would pursue a singing career, she said. All the entertainers looked so glamorous and wonderful, so I started writing songs. Informal bands and groups were popping up everywhere in Detroit in those days, partly because the public schools offered an extensive program of music education. Also, as Motown vocalist Claudette Robinson pointed out to Unsung, we didn't have computers, we didn't have phones. For entertainment, you played kick the can when you were young or board games. And one of the ways we entertained ourselves was to make music. Mary sang as much as she could, performing pop songs of the day, solo and in groups, some of them all male except for her. They didn't want me in there, but I was persistent, Mary said. Mary's talent and ambition soon led her to her first and only female boss, Detroit vocalist and music business entrepreneur Johnny Mae Matthews, later known as the godmother of Detroit soul. As a vocalist, Matthews sang with a group called the Five Daps, who recorded a single, Do Wop a Do, on Detroit's Brax record label. As a solo performer, she ended up releasing more than 25 singles on various labels. She founded her own record label, Northern Records, in Detroit in 1958. Although Mary had high hopes when she first signed a contract with Matthews, she was disappointed. Matthews never paid much attention to her or the other groups on her label, but instead concentrated on The Distance, recording their first two songs, Come On and All Right, soon after they arrived. As Otis Williams told Mark Ribowski for his book Ain't Too Proud to Beg, The Troubled Lives and Enduring Soul of the Temptations, Johnny Mae immediately put us out front. Mary quit soon after, but Mary did have some fun during her time with Matthews and had a brief affair with Otis Williams. After Mary left Matthews and Williams, she began dating Wilson Pickett, the future singing great, and the two told each other that they were going to be major stars. Pickett said he liked Mary's singing, but he, like Williams, appreciated other things about her as well. Mary liked Pickett, but her real heartthrob was successful Detroit vocalist Jackie Wilson, although she didn't know him. Mary decided she would write a song for Jackie Robinson, figuring that this would be a way to meet him and somehow get her foot in the music industry's door. Having been brought up religious, the teenage Mary was used to talking to God. She later said, I went into my secret closet, and asked God to help me write a song for Jackie Wilson. The song Bye Bye Baby entered her mind and she wrote it down. Mary was a very mystical woman and a spiritual little soul, Curtis Womack said years later. Looking for a way to get the song to Wilson, she remembered that Robert Bateman of the Satin Tones knew Berry Gordy and asked Bateman for an introduction. She knew that Jackie Wilson recorded for the established Brunswick Record Company, not the up-and-coming young Motown, but Gordy had written several pop hit singles for Wilson, including To Be Loved, which eventually became the title of Gordy's autobiography, That's Why I Love You So, I'll Be Satisfied, and in 1958, Lonely Teardrops, which not only hit number 1 on the Billboard Rhythm and Blues chart and rose to number 7 on the Billboard Pop chart as well, but was a very successful single. She wanted Gordy to pass her song to Wilson. Mary didn't realize that, due to a change of executives at Brunswick and a dispute over royalties, Gordy no longer worked with Wilson or his record company. If any songs she brought to Gordy were going to be recorded, the Motown Record Corporation would record them. After memorizing her song, Mary sang it for Bateman. He said he liked it and that he would arrange to let her sing it for Gordy. Her opportunity finally came when, directed by Bateman, she caught up with Gordy at the 20 Grand, Detroit's hottest nightclub. Gordy, busy directing a performance by vocalist Marv Johnson on one side of the club and on his way to direct the Miracles on the other side, literally walked away when the teenage Mary started talking, saying he was too busy to listen to her sales pitch. Mary followed him down the hallway almost in lockstep, begging for an appointment so she could present him with the song she had written. Finally, annoyed, Gordy turned around and told her to sing it right now. Mary immediately sang Bye Bye Baby a cappella, on the spot. Mary impressed Gordy so much, he later called her a soulful-sounding chick, that he told her to show up at Motown the next day. When she arrived with her mother accompanying her, Gordy told Mary she would record her song herself. Wells was so excited she yelled loudly and jumped around the office. I just wanted to be in the record business. I didn't think I would ever be an artist, she said later. Gordy signed her as a Motown recording artist that day, July 8, 1960. The company Mary joined would soon become legendary, and its name would eventually become a synonym for much of the popular music produced by Black Americans, whether they recorded for Motown Records or not. But when Mary joined, it was in its early stages. The story of how Mary sang her way to signing with Gordy, although true, acquired legendary status as the way a Detroit teenager with no professional experience but plenty of guts made it to the big time. Part of the success of Bye Bye Baby was the underlying seriousness with which Mary sang it. This was the real Mary. Mary also recorded the song Please Forgive Me, which Gordy wrote and which was placed on the B-side. Released in December 1960, Bye Bye Baby reached number 8 on the Billboard R&B chart, number 45 on the Billboard Pop chart, and number 41 on the Cashbox Pop chart. Soon thereafter, it stayed on the Cashbox Top 100 chart for 4 months. Mary smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day until the last 2 years of her life. Stephen Cohen, her manager in later years, remembered that during meetings with Mary, the room would be filled with smoke, and smoke would pour out of the door when it was opened. Friendly Womack Jr., her former brother-in-law, remembered, I used to tell her she was a singer and shouldn't be smoking, but she would laugh and continue smoking cigarette after cigarette. Her next record, which was a bigger hit, made Motown executives confident that they were pointing her in the right direction. The song, an up-tempo doo-wop tune written by Motown songwriter William Mickey Stevenson, was called I Don't Want to Take a Chance. Mary sang it smoothly, strongly, and melodically. The strain and hoarseness that were so evident in Bye Bye Baby were gone. Backed with I'm So Sorry, it was released in mid-1961 and not only rose to number 9 on the Billboard R&B chart, but reached number 33 on the Billboard Pop chart, moving Mary's career to the top. With the charting of I Don't Want to Take a Chance, she had become the first female soloist on the Motown label to reach the Billboard Top 40. As soon as he could, Gordy started sending Mary out to appear at theaters and clubs, first in Detroit and later all over the country. She would continue to perform on stage for paying audiences for most of the rest of her life. Very soon, she became the first female Motown vocalist to wear the long, elegant dresses that became the standard for the company's female performers. She also attempted to distinguish herself visually from the other female Motown vocalists, as well as emulate Etta James by wearing bouffant-style blonde wigs. But the nonstop touring she did for Motown caused some strain. She and her companions were hundreds of miles from home, living on a bus or in a series of cheap hotels, trying hard to remember where they were, and performing while disoriented and anxious. They often sought relief. Later in life, Mary said that when she and Levi Stubbs, the lead singer of the Four Tops, were young performers, they drank Robitussin cough medicine, topped off with liquor as an antidote to life on the road. On one occasion, Mary remembered, she overdid this and felt like crawling out on the stage when it was time for her to perform. For a short time while back in Detroit between tours, she ingested diet pills and liquor to get high. The resulting panic attacks were intense, and Mary decided enough was enough. Throughout the rest of her early career, she stayed away from both drinking and drugging. Motown had sent Hermann Griffin with Mary on her tours as her valet, driver, and protector, but soon Mary Wells became interested in him. As Curtis Womack said years later, Mary tended to get attached to someone who was taking care of her like that. She did get attached, and she married Griffin on June 23, 1961, when she was 18. She failed to ask for permission from Motown, however, and Gordy was not pleased. When Gordy had sent Griffin to travel with Mary, he had told Griffin, "Don't you even think of getting into that." Having sex with Mary, he meant. So when Wells and Griffin turned up at Motown married, Gordy and his executives were furious. They put Griffin on the hot seat, accusing him of marrying Mary so he could lock himself onto a rising star. The marriage was rocky from the start, Wells said, because I was still a kid and Griffin spent 3 evenings a week out of the house. He told her he had a friend in the record business who knew the industry well and that he spent those nights learning the business at the friend's house. This bothered Mary, who didn't like being alone and was used to being in a house with a big family. His excuse for not being home sounded fishy and it bothered her. Annette Helton of the Vandellas said, Griffin always appeared kind of mean, kind of stern. He didn't treat Mary nicely and always spoke to her in a snappy sort of way. About 8 months after they were married, the real trouble began. Wells said the arguments were not physical except when she got ready to leave one day and he tried to close the door to keep her from going out, and her finger got caught in the door and began bleeding. From that incident on, they did not get along.